Look at what working people in our country are dealing with right now. And what do you see? Massive income inequality, elites trying to divide us by race. Working Americans are even facing the reality of a shrinking life expectancy for the first time in how many years? It's looking pretty bleak, right? But there is a way for us to get through this. It's time to take a bold rethink to consider if the answer is unions. If you ask Americans today whether they approve of unions, an all-time high of 71% will say that they do. But at the same time, actual union membership has literally dropped to 6%, its lowest point in history. How can that be? Maybe it's because actually forming a union is the most difficult it's been in literally almost a century. And that's because for decades now, the corporate elites of this country have done everything that they can to take unions down at the kneecaps. Honestly, if it was up to billionaire CEOs like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, I think it's safe to say that unions would no longer exist. But America doesn't have to ask ourselves what that would look like, because we already lived it. Let's go back in history to the year 1935. That's when Congress passed the Wagner Act, guaranteeing the rights of American workers to organize into unions, engage in collective bargaining, and, when they needed to, go on strike. Before the Wagner Act, unions existed, but kind of in a Wild West environment. There were no rules stopping employers from intimidating or firing workers who attempted to unionize, and it was not unusual for big companies to hire spies to infiltrate union ranks or even show up at strikes with guns and tear gas. But by the end of the 1940s, union membership in the United States had quadrupled to 10 million. Nearly 1/3 of all American workers were now represented by a union, and life changed for the better. Unions helped win contracts for far higher wages, safer working conditions, stronger job security, and better benefits. And that's when the real backlash began. Republicans in Congress introduced the Taft-Hartley Act, allowing states to pass so-called right-to-work laws. Now, employees in unionized companies could refuse to join the union or pay dues, even while enjoying union benefits. And it outlawed unions from taking strikes industry-wide or striking in solidarity with workers from different industries. And this was the big one. You see, if steel workers wanted to strike, it was no longer legal for all steel workers to strike, or if railroad workers wanted to strike on behalf of the coal workers, because those are the folks that fueled their trains, they were not legally allowed to help. Smart. Evil. But smart. Still, for the next 2 decades, unions stayed strong, helping usher in an economic golden age for the middle class. But in 1972, that all changed. The Chamber of Commerce released a manifesto from conservative Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, literally suggesting that corporate America start engaging in guerrilla warfare against unions, and union busting went mainstream. The Chamber of Commerce became one of the biggest special interest groups in the United States, spending billions lobbying against unions. And union avoidance firms, with the sole purpose of taking big bucks from corporations to bust up organized labor, grew by the hundreds. Even President Reagan got in the game when in 1981, he fired more than 11,000 striking air traffic controllers and barred them from ever working again for the federal government. Oh, and guess what rationale he used to make that happen? The Taft-Hartley laws from back in 1947. Today, it hasn't gotten any easier for unions. In 2021 and 2022, workers won major victories when they successfully voted to unionize at companies like REI, Amazon, Apple, Trader Joe's, Chipotle, and Starbucks. But since then, almost none of those companies have shown up to the table to actually sign a union contract. Why? Because the current penalties for deliberately and illegally dragging out negotiations are far more appealing to these corporations than the cost of actually allowing workers to unionize. Still, working folks are holding strong, and we've got to. Because, for real, unions might be our last best hope for the American dream. I mean, union workers literally make $1.3 million more over their lifetimes than non-union workers. And when working people thrive, so do their families. They get to buy homes, their kids get to go to college, and their entire communities are lifted up. But unions are about more than money. They're about keeping political power in the hands of working Americans, otherwise known as democracy. I mean, unlike Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, most of us can't afford to hire a lobbyist to represent our interests in DC, but our unions can. It matters who makes the rules, because ultimately, we're the ones that have to play by them. So protect our unions, fight for our unions, and vote for candidates and parties who support them. It's the last best way to safeguard the American dream for generations to come. This is Nadia Marina reporting for Bold ReThink.